introduction of myself. So I'm told to do a quick introduction because of the limitation of time. So many of you probably don't know me, and the best way to introduce myself is I am Suresh Sakpal, and I am married to Sarkala Sakpal. Thank you SMN team for allowing me to share my experience and my opinion on this interesting and quite a controversial subject, which is how much is the history of India is actually true.
Adesh, can you make sure we have silence there?
The general perception about us Indians is that we are not proud of our own history. And it's interesting because India is arguably a world's most and the longest surviving civilization. So it's one of the oldest, but still there is a myth and there is the expectation that we Indians don't like our history or not proud of our history. And when actually we dig deep into the fact, and it's my opinion, that intuitively, in our mind, somewhere deep down in our heart, we believe that the history we read in our history books is fake. And because we know it is fake, we basically just don't respect it. So I am making an attempt here to present my case as to how much of the Indian history is true, or by the converse, not true, and how we can correctly tell the story. So it's not a song, it's not a dance, what I'm going to do is a storytelling. And the Indian history that we read is wrong fundamentally because it's not our history at all. It's the history of our foreign invaders, who basically writing the history of their own invasion. If you read Indian history, it's the long list of the battles that the Indians always lost. You always read about the 3 battles of Panipat, then there is a battle of Plassey, battle of Asai, and of course the 1857. You never read about any battle that Indians have won. But there are quite a lot of battles which actually Indian won, for the simple reason that we are still here. And Indians have got their long continuation of civilization by spilling a lot of blood. I'm going to give you some examples of the battles which probably many of you may have never heard of, but are the major events in the Indian history. We all know about how Muhammad Ghazni came and invaded India 17 times in 25 years. So conventional history book tells us that Muhammad Ghazni came, invaded India 17 times, followed by Muhammad Ghori, who came, defeated Prithviraj Chauhan, and then basically the floodgates of India were open for all the Turkic invasion. Would you believe that nothing of that sort is actually true? What historians don't tell us is there is actually a gap of around 160 years, mind you, 1.5 century between when Muhammad Ghazni arrived and when Muhammad Ghori came. So why there is this gap of around 160 years? Because there was a king, a relatively unknown king named Sukhdev or Sohaildev Pasi. In 1033 AD, he enticed the Turkic barbaric army led by the nephew of Muhammad Ghazni near what is today's Faizabad or Ayodhya. And in history it is recorded as the Battle of Bahrij, 1033 AD. And he did such a thorough job of defeating the Turks that no Turk ever dared to invade India for another 160 years. But obviously no history book will tell you about it, and the only people who remember about this are the Parsis themselves, the caste to which this king belonged. If you are not an Assamese, or if you have not been in Assam, you probably never heard of a home general named Lasit Borphukan. Now, Lasit Borphukan was a general in a home kingdom. He defeated the Aurangzeb army at the peak of the Mughal Empire. He somehow convinced them to fight a naval battle on Brahmaputra. And obviously, the Assamese had advantage to fight a naval battle, and he practically sank the entire fleet of Aurangzeb's army. And that was around the same time when Shivaji was fighting Aurangzeb, and the Bundelas and then the Sikhs tried to revolt against the Mughals. If you are not from Kerala, you probably have never heard of a king named Markandeya Varma. Markanda Varma was the king of very, very small kingdom of Vietnam, which is currently called as Travancore. And when he came to throne, he decided to take on the mightiest naval and the colonial superpower of 17th century. And ironically, it has been forgotten today, but it was the Dutch East India Company. The Dutch East Indian Company was so big that by that time they had already invaded what is now Indonesia, they had already taken over Ceylon, and they had already taken South Africa. And of course, they were trying to invade India. But Markanda Varma, with his small army, fought such a brave battle, which is known as the Battle of Kolachal for 1671. And he did such a great job that thankfully I am here today giving you the lecture in English and not in Dutch. Of course, Bajirao Mastani, till the time the movie was released, I'm not sure if many Indians have known about Bajirao Peshwa, who of course was a great Maratha general. In his life, he fought around 41 battles and won all of them, a record which is far better than Napoleon. It's a misconception that the Britishers came in and conquered India from Mughals. But actually the history is the Britishers came and actually had to conquer India by fighting to Marathas. The Marathas at their peak of the empire ruled the Indian subcontinent in north up until Attock. In Marathi there is a saying called Atke Par Jhenda. Attock is a small fort near Peshawar and there is a river by the name Attock. So that gives you a perspective of how big the Maratha kingdom was. And in south they were ruling up until Travancore, which is quite deep in south. So this is a Maratha empire. The last Peshwa, Bajirao's probably third or fourth descendant, his name was Raghunath Rao, and he probably ruled on a kingdom that big for more than 70 years, which is almost the same time India is being independent. But no history book will tell you that the Raghunath Rao was ruling kingdom far, far bigger than that of Akbar's. In fact, the Battle of 1857 was actually the fight of the remaining Marathas, largely, who were trying to revolt against the British army. And if we come back to the recent history of Indian independence, I would put a case that the role of our Indian revolutionaries has largely been ignored or misrepresented in our history books. It was okay for the British colonial time, but the same has been continued even after 70 years of Indian independence. Our history tags the revolutionaries as some hot-blooded, misguided youths who undertook some random acts of violence, but by and large had no impact on India's independence or the freedom struggle. But the case is revolutionaries were such an organized bunch of people with such great network, and they had a very, very fine and ultimate goal of capturing and managing, I would say, inciting and inciting the revolt in the British armed forces, which largely comprised of Indian soldiers. And everything else they did was a peripheral to their ultimate goal. I'm not sure if many of you have learned in the history books about the Gadar movement and the contributions of the people who led the Gadar movement, the likes of Ras Bihari Bose. This Gadar movement was formed around the same time of World War I, and the Gadar movement led by Ras Bihari Bose came within 72 hours of causing a major revolt in the British Empire had they not failed during the World War I. In fact, Ras Bihari Bose was the first Indian revolutionary who escaped to Japan. He's the one who actually founded the Indian National Army, and by the Second World War, he handed it over to Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. And in the recent past, if you know or if you remember, I doubt it, but there is this naval mutiny of 1946, which actually is fundamentally the reason why Britishers decided to pack up their bags and leave India. In 1946, the British naval forces actually captured Mumbai port and some other critical ports. And when the British government ordered the army and the Royal Air Force to attack these naval rebel forces, they refused. And that's the time when Britishers realized that their days were numbered and they had to find a dignified way to exit India. In fact, there is a very famous BBC interview of B.R. Ambedkar, where he actually admits and he confirms that the naval mutiny of 1946 was the key reason why Britishers decided to leave, and it has nothing to do with making a salt. I can go on and on and on about this. But the fact is, this has to change, and we have to spread some awareness to change this. The history of India has largely been the history of Delhi. It has to stop being the history of Delhi, has to include the wider Indian geography and all those forgotten kings and dynasties. There is no mention of Cholas and Pandyas and Satavahanas in the history books. What we read in the history books is actually a political history of India, which is important. But there is also a geographical history of India, which is equally important. Have you ever thought that why India was always invaded from the northwest border of India? Why there was no invasion from the northeast? The glorified past of the northeast has completely been wiped out. It is thanks to our Manipuri and Assamese resistance continuously, all their invaders, that there was never a successful invasion from our northeast borders. In fact, Manipuris were the last bunch of people who were subdued to the British Kingdom towards the end of 19th century. So if you never pick up a fight with a Manipuri woman, you know Mary Kom has proved it. And I'm married to a Marathi woman, so I would not suggest that either. Anyway, jokes apart. There is a large bit of a maritime history and a maritime culture of India. The Odisha was the key of the shipbuilding industry of the ancient India. The Indians were trading and traveling all up to southeast from Sri Lanka to Vietnam. In fact, there is a large population of Sri Lankan Sinhalese people who are from Bengali and Odia origin, and they are not from Tamil origin, which is actually a nearby coast to Sri Lanka. If you know Indonesia, which fairly got the independence at the same time of India, 1949, they named their country after India. Their currency is still rupiah. Their national airline is called Garuda, which is their national emblem. And they proudly keep their Indian heritage and Indian names, even though they have converted to be a Muslim country. The largest Hindu temple is of course in Cambodia, Angkor Wat, and they largely reflect that on their national flag. You must have learned about the industrial revolution that changed the Europe and the country that we are currently living in. And we have been singing songs about the industrial revolution and the greatness about that. But no historian has actually managed to tell you that the entire industrial revolution was funded by largely India and other colonies of the British Empire, who supplied all the raw material. Where did the steel, the cotton, the zinc came from? The GDP of India has been curtailed systematically since the starting of the Industrial Revolution, and India has been looted of the natural resources, and even the people had audacity to take loot as the word in their own dictionary. And if we come further, India has a great heritage in science and technology. You don't have to be a believer in the Vedic flying chariots to be proud of the Indian scientific achievements. The Sushruts work on doing the plastic surgery has been well documented in Rig Vedas. It is the Europeans who actually copied the technique of the plastic surgery from Indians in 18th and 19th century. If you talk about metallurgy, India was the first to smelt zinc, and there is still a place in Rajasthan where that is done. In fact, Indians are the ones who invented the technique of distillation called downward distillation to smelt zinc as an ore. Then we know about algebra. Not many people like maths, but algebra is the combination of two words called al-jabr. Initially, it was credited to the Latins, and then Latins started giving the credit of al-jabr to the Arabs, that who invented al-jabr. And in fact, in the al-jabr documentation, the Arab guy gives his credit to the Indian Vedic scripts, but that credit would never come to Indians who actually founded algebra. When we were in school, the days were different. But now we are living in the world where information is actually available quite handy. And I've given you information which you can check right now on Google sitting in this hall. So I'm trying to do here is try to spread some awareness that we need to change and make people think how far and how much the Indian history is actually true. And we need to make some changes to tell people the true story for the next generation to come, to have them and feel about the Indian grand narrative. It's a problem because a lot of history about India and the Indic civilization is written by the Western historians. And I don't have any problem with that. But there is a significant lack of research and development, funding and efforts of writing Indian history from Indian standpoint. That's appalling. And we have to be blamed partially for not representing our own history. History is always a perception. It's written by somebody's perspective. And it's a high time that as an Indian, we should be doing that. Now, how do we do that? The simple reason is, history is based on evidences. If you cannot prove and produce evidences, it's a mythology, it's a myth. So first thing is we have to agree and decide what this evidence is going to be. List down the evidences, good, bad, ugly. We may have done some bad things, we may have done some appalling things, but list all the evidences. Remember, interpretations and evidences are two different things. Everybody has a right to their own interpretations, but no one has a right to their own evidences. So list down the evidences, allow the multitude of different interpretations of those evidences. It will make our history interesting. The good thing is, it will be honest, and it will become some explorations of our glorious past, rather than actually just limited to random memorizing of some random dates and events. I couldn't care less about the Modellimento reforms and the Akbar's Mansabdari system if I can learn about some good things about our history. So there is a African saying which I would like to end my talk here with, that the history, unless you have the storytellers for the liars, the history of the hunt is always going to glorify the hunter. Thank you.